I spent years of my life avoiding things I might fail at. Not obviously, not in ways people could see, but quietly, carefully. I built my entire life around never being caught not knowing something, never being seen struggling, never being the person in the room who didn't have the answer. And for a long time, I genuinely thought that was just who I was, a careful person, someone who thought things through before acting. But looking back now, it was just fear, dressed up as caution. I had social anxiety through most of my teenage years and into college. And at the time, I thought about myself in really negative ways. Why am I like this? Why can't I just be normal? Why does everyone else seem fine when I'm always struggling? There's this gap between who you actually are and who you want people to think you are. And I think for a lot of people, managing that gap quietly becomes a full-time job. You get used to it that you don't even notice how much energy it's consuming, how many things you're not doing because of it. For me, it showed up most clearly in college. Every semester when class registration opened, I would go through the course descriptions looking for one thing. Does this class require presentations? If it did, I didn't take it. I would rearrange my entire academic schedule just to avoid standing in front of 100 people and saying something wrong. It wasn't passive avoidance, it was active, strategic avoidance. I was working hard to avoid the thing that scared me. I also used to pretend, like when friends brought up topics I wasn't familiar with, sometimes I would just nod along, act like I knew, because I needed to be the person who always had the answer. The one who never looked lost. And here's what's almost funny in retrospect. None of that made me feel better. Every time I successfully avoided something, I confirmed to myself that it was worth avoiding. I was feeding the fear without realizing it. All of that effort to protect my image kept me exactly where I was. Because you can't grow inside the walls you build to protect yourself. But something interesting happened. Whenever a professor randomly called on me without warning, no time to spiral, I was actually fine. Nervous, sure, but nowhere near as paralyzed as when I had had a week to dread it. The anticipation was always worse than the thing itself. The version of failure I had built in my head, the permanent judgment, the humiliation, almost never happened. What actually happened was usually just a slightly awkward moment. And then life continued. The fear wasn't really about the presentation. It was about the story I was telling myself about what would happen if I failed. And that story was almost always wrong. That's the cruelest thing about the gap between who you are and who you want to be. You spend so much energy managing that distance that you never actually close it. Because closing it requires doing the exact things that might expose you. Trying something you might fail at. Being seen not knowing. Being seen as a work in progress rather than a finished product. There is a study about this. 2 groups of photography students. The first group was told to take one perfect photo. The second group was told to take as many photos as possible and pick their best one at the end. You would expect the first group to win, but the second group produced significantly better work. Because the first group was so paralyzed by not wasting their one shot that they second-guessed everything. The second group just shot. Through the bad photos, the blurry ones, they figured out what worked by doing it. That's what avoidance costs you. All the accidental improvement that only happens when you stop protecting yourself from the bad attempt. The bad attempt is part of the process. Sometimes it's the most important part. I think the reason most people can't just stop being afraid of failure, even when they know they should, is that the mental hurdle is still too high. Every attempt feels like it says something permanent about you if it goes wrong. So, what if you change the goal entirely? What if, instead of trying to succeed, you actively try to fail? Not carelessly, but deliberately reframing what you're going in for. Going into the conversation knowing you might say something stupid and deciding that's fine because you're there to see what happens. Posting the video before it feels ready because the alternative is posting nothing. When you go in trying to succeed, failure feels like a verdict. When you go in genuinely indifferent to whether you fail, failure becomes information, something that makes you slightly more calibrated than before. And paradoxically, that's usually when you actually perform better, because the pressure is gone. I think about this through the lens of physical training, because of my background in physiotherapy. So when you lift weights, the muscle doesn't grow during the lift. It grows during recovery from the damage the lift caused. The breakdown is not the unfortunate side effect of training. It's the mechanism. That's how it works. Failure works the same way. Every time you try something and it doesn't go well, your brain is adapting, making you slightly less likely to crumble next time. But only if you actually go through it. You can't build that from just watching. Only from doing it badly first and surviving. So practically, lower the stakes of individual attempts. Instead of one big scary try, many small tries. Talk to someone you don't know. Share an opinion you're not sure about. Start before you've figured out how to do it perfectly. Each one is a small failure waiting to happen, and each one is also evidence that you survived, that the catastrophe didn't materialize. Over time, those pieces accumulate and start to change the story you tell yourself. Not because someone convinced you, because your own experience did. I'm still working on this. I still catch myself avoiding things. The anxiety doesn't disappear. But the reframe that changed something for me isn't failure is okay. That still treats it as something to tolerate. The reframe is failure is the asset. It's not the cost of trying, it's the return. Every time something doesn't go the way you want it, you got something the person who didn't try simply doesn't have. More prepared, more calibrated, more resilient. So, don't try to succeed. Try to fail as many times as you can and pay attention to what happens after. Because that's where the growth actually lives. Not in the wins, in what you build from the losses.